Imagine standing at 15,000 feet in the freezing Himalayas.
Yeah, and wearing a cotton summer uniform.
Right, exactly. Wearing a summer uniform, holding a World War I era bolt-action rifle, and just watching a modern, heavily armed enemy force marching relentlessly toward you.
It's terrifying.
It is. So we've just established why the geopolitical ghosts of 1962 still haunt those very mountains today. Now, we bring it all together.
We really must. I mean, our core objective in this final session is answering the most critical question, right? What should every military professional remember from the 1962 Sino-Indian War?
Yeah, because we're at the concluding session of this deep dive.
Exactly, because if we look closely, that freezing soldier wasn't just a victim of a tactical failure. He was the ultimate casualty of a systemic collapse.
A collapse that began, what, thousands of miles away?
Right, thousands of miles away in the political corridors of power in Delhi.
So today's deep dive is going to integrate the entire campaign into a single strategic framework. We aren't just, repeating historical events here.
No, not at all.
We are moving beyond the what and diving deep into the how and why. We're shifting from recounting historical tragedies to extracting pure conceptual depth.
That's the goal.
By the end of the session, you, our listener, will see how everything from a prime minister's foreign policy ideology to the literal firing pin of a soldier's rifle is intricately connected.
Because any military campaign's failure or success, it begins long before the first shot is fired.
Right.
It takes root in the minds of the political leadership. If the political vision is completely disconnected from reality, then military strategy can never be successful.
That makes sense.
The foundation of the 1962 disaster wasn't laid in the snows of Nam Kachuu. It was laid in the political decisions and the strategic background of the early 1950s.
Let's unpack the psychology of that era then. I mean, in the 1950s, the dominant ideology driving India was Hindi Chini Bhai Hai, alongside the Panchsheel Agreement.
Yeah, brotherly relations and peaceful coexistence.
Right. There was this intense, almost intoxicating idealism. The political leadership firmly believed that post-colonial Asian nations, since they had both suffered under imperialism, would naturally ally with each other.
It was a very romantic view of foreign policy.
But it's not like they were operating in a total vacuum without warning signs, right? Were there voices pointing out the actual reality of the situation?
There were. There was one incredibly sharp voice, and it belonged to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel.
Oh, really? What did he say?
So in November 1950, right after China annexed Tibet, Patel wrote this prophetic letter to the prime minister.
1950. So this is 12 years before the war.
12 years prior, yes. If you read that letter today, it reads like a masterclass in strategic foresight. Patel fundamentally understood that Tibet acted as a massive geopolitical buffer.
A giant shield.
Exactly. With Tibet gone, the Himalayas were no longer an impenetrable barrier. At that time, Patel pointed out that there was a massive difference between the Chinese government's diplomacy and their actual military intentions.
So he saw through the diplomatic pleasantries.
He absolutely did. He warned that Chinese irredentism, their desire to reclaim what they viewed as lost historical territories combined with communist imperialism, was a massive existential threat.
He actually used those terms.
He was very explicit. He stated that for the first time in centuries, India had to concentrate on two fronts simultaneously.
The West and the North.
Right, the West with Pakistan and the North with China. He saw the chessboard clearly, but his warnings were they were buried.
Buried because it contradicted that romanticized vision of international relations we talked about.
Precisely.
So what does this tell us about national security management at the time? I mean, we're a newly independent nation in the 1950s. Did we even have a framework to process a threat assessment like Patel's?
No, we had absolutely no institutionalized framework. Post-independence India lacked anything resembling a modern national security council.
Nothing at all.
Nothing formal. Foreign policy and defense were entirely personality-driven. Decisions were made based on ideological wishful thinking rather than cold political realism.
So everything was running on one person's beliefs.
Yes. The leadership genuinely believed that threats could be neutralized purely by diplomatic maneuvering and global moral posturing.
Wow.
They simply didn't see the need to back up diplomacy with hard, credible military power.
And when you have no institutional mechanism to challenge a leader's assumptions, I guess you rely heavily on the individuals surrounding them.
That's the danger, yes.
Which brings us to a figure whose actions still baffle me. Intelligence Bureau Director B.N. Mullick.
Ah, yes, Mole.
He became the primary architect of this intelligence premise that China would not react militarily to Indian border moves.
That was his guarantee.
How does the head of a nation's intelligence apparatus get something so catastrophically wrong? Was he just incompetent?
It wasn't simple incompetence. It was a lethal combination of sycophancy and what we call confirmation biases on a national scale.
Confirmation bias.
Right. Mullick tailored his intelligence assessments to fit the political desires of the leadership.
Oh, I see. Telling them what they wanted to hear.
Exactly. The political leaders wanted to believe China wouldn't attack, so Mullick provided reports validating that exact feeling.
But intelligence is supposed to be objective.
Intelligence is supposed to be the objective truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Intelligence should guide policy. But here, policy was dictating intelligence.
So Malik assured them that pushing border posts into disputed territories wouldn't provoke a violent Chinese response.
He assured them it would barely provoke a diplomatic protest.
Wow.
And when you have a fundamental mismatch between your perception of the adversary and what the adversary is actually capable of doing, you are setting the stage for a massacre.
Yeah.
When you underestimate the enemy's capability just for your own convenience, disaster is inevitable.
Let's talk about the specific friction between political objectives and military capability. Because the political leaders were so enamored with their foreign policy, they actively neglected the armed forces, didn't they?
They did, very much so.
I was reading that they actually believed border police forces, like just lightly armed constabulary, were sufficient to manage the Himalayan frontier.
That was the prevailing mindset, unfortunately. A large, well-equipped standing army was viewed almost with suspicion.
Suspicion? Why?
It was seen as an expensive relic of the colonial past, something that an impoverished, peace-loving nation just didn't need.
Right.
And this institutional neglect was weaponized by the defense minister at the time, V.K. Krishna Menon.
Krishna Menon.
Yes. He was intellectually brilliant, a formidable orator at the UN, but an absolute disaster for military preparedness.
Because he micromanaged the military without understanding military operations.
Far worse than just micromanagement. He fundamentally distrusted the professional military brass. He dismissed professional military advice as alarmist. He played favorites, promoting officers based on their political compliance rather than their tactical acumen.
That's a recipe for disaster.
He completely politicized the entire army. Menon firmly believed China would never attack, and any general who presented evidence to the contrary or demanded better logistics was sidelined or humiliated.
It's like driving a car on a treacherous, icy mountain road while stubbornly looking only in the rearview mirror at the road you've already passed.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, the political leadership was so fixated on the legacy of anti-imperialism and non-alignment that they completely missed the geopolitical cliff right in front of them.
A perfect visualization. They were making grand strategic decisions without the foundation of objective analysis or professional military advice.
Right.
So when the time eventually came, and they casually ordered the military to evict the Chinese, they did so without pausing to ask if the military possessed the physical capacity to execute that order.
Which transitions us perfectly into our second core area, military preparedness and the forward policy.
Yes, the ground reality.
Because the gap between what the politicians wanted and what the soldiers actually had is just gut-wrenching. Let's look at the logistical reality on the ground.
To understand the sheer chasm between preparedness and reaction, look at the cold, hard numbers. In 1962, the Indian Army consisted of roughly 280,000 troops.
Okay, 280,000.
And they were short of 60,000 basic infantry rifles.
Wait, short 60,000?
Yes. Think about that. Even before a shot is fired, a massive chunk of the army cannot even be armed.
That's insane.
And the rifles they did have, World War I vintage .303 bolt-action Lee Enfields.
We need to explain why that matters mechanically to you listening. A .303 bolt action means a soldier fires one round, physically pulls the bolt back to eject the casing, pushes it forward to load the next round, and then fires again.
Yes, every single shot.
In freezing temperatures, with numb fingers, your rate of fire is incredibly slow.
Meanwhile, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the PLA, was fielding automatic weapons.
Submachine guns.
They had modern submachine guns, self-loading rifles, and heavy mortars.
Yeah.
In mountain warfare, whoever can put down the maximum volume of suppressing fire wins the firefight.
Right.
An Indian soldier with a .303 cannot suppress a Chinese squad with automatic weapons. It's just physics. And beyond rifles, the Indian Army lacked 700 anti-tank guns, 5,000 radio sets, thousands of miles of field cable for communications, and thousands of transport trucks.
And amidst this crippling shortage of everything, the political leadership pushes the forward policy.
Yeah, the fatal policy.
For those trying to visualize this, the forward policy meant establishing these tiny, isolated outposts, sometimes just a dozen men in highly disputed territory to stake a claim.
Yes.
It was essentially a massive geopolitical bluff based on Moloch's guarantee that the Chinese would just sit there and watch.
It was like playing a high-stakes game of chess where you push your pawns deep into the opponent's side of the board.
And you have no backup.
Exactly. You secretly have no powerful pieces, no rooks, knights, or queens to protect them if the opponent decides to strike. The military deficiencies of the forward policy were staggering.
I can imagine.
You were placing small, isolated detachments without adequate logistical supply lines, without any artillery cover, and right in the face of a superior, well-entrenched enemy.
How are they even getting supplies?
They were relying on human porters.
Guys carrying things.
Porters who had to trek for days just to deliver a few kilograms of rations because they had to carry their own survival gear as well.
Oh, man.
We were also relying on primitive airdrops in the high Himalayas. Troops were being airlifted and dropped into heights of 14,000 to 15,000 feet in cotton summer uniforms.
Summer uniforms at 15,000 feet, that's a death sentence.
They were issued a single blanket. Many had canvas PT shoes instead of snow boots.
PT shoes in the snow.
Yes. And they were given just 50 rounds of ammunition per man. Just imagine being at 15,000 feet in freezing temperatures, standing in front of the enemy without basic survival gear. It wasn't a defense strategy. It was a sacrifice.
But wait, I have to push back here. The military leadership wasn't a monolith, right?
No, it wasn't.
The generals on the ground, the ones reading the supply reports and looking at the terrain, they knew this was suicide.
They absolutely did.
We talk about the chain of command, but surely self-preservation or a duty to your men kicks in. Why didn't they stop it? Is the chain of command just a convenient excuse for a lack of moral courage?
The chain of command is never an excuse, but you have to understand the systemic rot that had taken hold. There was indeed a clear split in the military. You had veteran, battle-hardened generals like Tamaya and Thorat who actively resisted this policy.
Okay, so they did push back.
General Thorat is the ultimate case study in moral courage here. When asked to implement the forward policy, he did the math. He looked at the terrain, the lack of roads, the weaponry, and he recognized it was militarily unsound.
Right.
He categorically refused to subordinate his professional military judgment to the defense minister's delusions.
And what happened to him?
He was sidelined.
Of course.
He chose to retire rather than lead his men into a slaughter. That is true moral courage. It's easy to kill your conscience and follow wrong orders, but it's hard to put your career on the line and take the right stand.
Yeah, that's heavy.
But with men like Thorat gone, a new chain of command was installed. Generals Thapar, Sen, and most notably, B.M. Call.
General Call is a fascinating and tragic figure in this. He was appointed as a corps commander, right?
Yes, he was. And Call had experienced meteoric career growth purely due to his proximity to the prime minister and the defense minister.
Oh, so a political appointee, basically.
Essentially. He had a background in the Army Service Corps. He had absolutely no real combat command experience.
Wow.
When you place politically compliant officers in critical command positions, you destroy the necessary friction that must exist between military reality and political ambition.
You need someone who can say no.
Exactly. A healthy system requires a general to look a politician in the eye and say, "No, sir, we cannot do that." Call, Sen, and Army Chief Thapar lacked the capacity to say no to patently unsound directives. They allowed the military to be completely browbeaten.
This fatal cocktail, I mean, zero preparedness mixed with a total collapse of moral courage at the highest levels, it directly birthed the operational disasters on the ground.
It did. It set the stage for everything that followed.
Let's look at the major campaigns then. We aren't going to narrate the battles step by step, but we need to extract the raw operational lessons from Nam Kachu, Tawang, Sayla, Bomdila, Walong, Chushul, and Rizangla.
Let's start with the eastern sector, Nam Kachu and Tawang.
Okay.
The battle at the Nam Kachu River perfectly illustrates the lethal consequences of poor terrain selection and non-existent logistics. Our troops, specifically the 7th Infantry Brigade, were ordered to deploy in the Nam Kachu Valley.
In a valley.
Yes. From a purely military perspective, Deploying in an indefensible river valley while the enemy holds the dominating mountain ridges above you is a death sentence.
Explain the mechanics of that. Why is a valley so deadly?
In mountain warfare, elevation is everything. The Chinese held the Phagla Ridge. They had full, unhindered observation of Indian positions.
They could see everything.
Everything. They could see every trench being dug, every patrol moving. They could calculate exactly where to drop their heavy mortar rounds.
Wow.
When the enemy is watching you from above and you have no artillery support to counter them, you are essentially a sitting duck. The Chinese didn't even have to fight hard. They just rained down fire from above and then swarmed down the slopes. The Indian brigade was annihilated in hours.
Annihilated in hours. Just, man. So Namkachu was a failure of terrain and resources. But then we look at Selah and Bomdila, which represent a completely different, almost psychological failure.
Exactly. Namkachu was a physical defeat. Selah was a command failure.
How so?
Well, Selah was actually an incredibly strong, highly defensible geographic position. It dominated the surrounding area, it was heavily fortified, and it gave our troops time to prepare.
So they should have been able to hold it.
The troops there could have held off the Chinese for weeks, if not months. But Selah fell because the higher command completely lost its nerve. They lacked confidence and the fundamental will to fight.
How does the stronghold just fall without a massive battle?
Through command paralysis and panic, we had vague, contradictory orders coming from Corps and Army headquarters. The commanders in the rear were terrified of being outflanked.
The commanders in the rear were terrified.
Yes. So orders to withdraw were given to the troops at Selah. Then, halfway through the withdrawal, those orders were canceled.
What a mess.
Then they were reissued. This created absolute chaos. Troops at Selah and Bomdila were forced into a chaotic, disorganized retreat down the mountains without even getting a proper chance to fire their weapons.
That is heartbreaking.
It was a complete failure of leadership at the brigade, division, and corps levels. The commanders broke before the soldiers did.
But then you contrast that command panic in the East with the absolute pinnacle of tactical courage we saw in the West.
Yes, a completely different story.
At Walong, Chushul, and especially Rizangla, I want to highlight Rizangla, you had Charlie Company of the 13th Kuman Battalion, 112 men holding a freezing ridge against massive Chinese human wave attacks.
Yes, 112 men.
They fought to the last round and then hand-to-hand. 112 men fought and only 14 survived.
The Battle of Rizangla is a testament to the fact that the Indian soldier was incredibly brave, highly disciplined, and fully capable of fighting. The failure of 1962 was not at the level of the Jawan.
Right.
The ultimate tragedy is that these brave men at Rizangla were strategically abandoned. They fought in isolated pockets, massively outnumbered, heavily outgunned, without artillery support, and without adequate winter gear.
Which highlights the crucial difference between military success and strategic success.
Precisely. You can win a tactical firefight, you can repulse an attack, you can even hold a mountain post to the last man. But if holding that post doesn't serve a larger, coordinated strategic objective, or if the rest of your campaign is collapsing around you because there is no grand plan.
And what's the point?
Exactly. Yeah. Then it's just a tactical anomaly in a strategic defeat.
This raises a massive question about the adversary. If our soldiers at Rizangla had the grit, the failure wasn't tactical. It was operational and strategic. How did the Chinese manage to coordinate so flawlessly? What was their playbook while our command was collapsing?
The Chinese executed a masterclass in Sun Tzu's principles of war. First, let's look at opportune timing.
Timing, okay.
They launched their massive offensives exactly during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962.
Oh, wow. I never put those two together.
If it was no coincidence, the two global superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, were literally inches away from a global nuclear war. The entire world's attention and all diplomatic bandwidth was completely diverted to the Caribbean.
So China had a free hand.
China knew that neither superpower would intervene in the Himalayas while facing nuclear Armageddon. And notably, as soon as the Cuban crisis eased in late November, China declared a unilateral ceasefire.
That is cold, calculated geopolitical timing.
Yeah.
And on the ground, what was their strategy there?
On the ground, they utilized absolute surprise and deception. They masked their massive troop and artillery buildup behind the mountains.
Right.
They diplomatically framed their massive pre-planned defensive as a counterattack and self-defense against the Indian forward policy.
A convenient excuse.
But most importantly, they had a crystal clear political aim: to teach India a severe military lesson, assert their dominance in Asia, and secure their vital strategic highway through the Aksai Chin region.
So they knew exactly what they wanted.
Because their political aim was clear, their military aim was clear, they fought a cohesive, interconnected campaign. We were just fighting fragmented, desperate holding actions.
To really understand why our command was so fragmented, we have to move from the physical battlefield into the concept of the higher direction of war.
Yes, the strategic level.
Because the breakdown of the Indian higher command structure is just staggering to think about today. For instance, Eastern Command, which was responsible for defending the entire Northeast Frontier Agency, modern-day Arunachal Pradesh, it was located in Lucknow.
Yes, Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh. It was hundreds of miles away from the mountain.
That makes no sense.
The general officer commanding-in-chief of Eastern Command was sitting in an office in the plains, trying to make operational decisions off a flat map, completely blind to the brutal ground realities of the Himalayas.
Looking at a flat map of the Himalayas?
He was ordering troops to occupy dots on a map, positions that had no tactical advantage, no water sources, and no supply roads. This only served to dilute our combat strength. The disconnect between Delhi, Lucknow, and the forward freezing trenches was absolute.
And nothing illustrates this bureaucratic absurdity better than the infamous order to evict the Chinese.
Ah, yes. That order.
To a layman, it sounds like a tough political stance, evict them. But to a military mind, what does that order actually mean, and how is it issued?
From a military standpoint, evict the Chinese is not a policing action. It is an act of war. An operation of that magnitude requires deep, painstaking operational planning. It requires months of logistical stockpiling, moving artillery, securing supply lines, and a clear-eyed assessment of what the enemy will do in retaliation.
You can't just evict an army like a bad tenant.
Exactly. And how was this monumental order issued? A civilian defense minister verbally pushes for it, and the actual directive is signed and sent down by a mere Undersecretary of the Ministry of Defense.
A mid-level bureaucrat.
A mid-level bureaucrat.
A piece of paper starting a war.
Exactly. The military leadership at Army headquarters should have immediately pushed back. They should have demanded formal, written orders from the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Committee and attached a realistic, brutal assessment of what eviction would cost in blood and national treasure.
But they didn't.
Instead, a politically compliant chain of command just saluted and passed the impossible order down to the freezing men at the front.
It's literally like a corporate headquarters trying to micromanage a factory floor during a massive chemical fire.
That's a tragically accurate analogy.
The board of directors is sending emails demanding the fire be put out without knowing how the machines work, where the exits are, or that the fire extinguishers are empty.
Spot on. Now contrast that Indian paralysis with Chinese operational art. We need to define this. Operational art is the vital missing link between strategy and tactics.
How so?
Strategy sets the grand political goal. Tactics is the squad of men winning the actual firefight. But operational art is how a commander designs the entire campaign, how they sequence battles, move divisions, and manage logistics to ensure the tactical forces actually achieve the strategic goal.
And the Chinese were executing this operational art beautifully in the mountains.
Flawlessly. They relied heavily on indirect methods. They didn't just smash their infantry blindly into Indian strongpoints.
What did they do instead?
They used the difficult terrain to their advantage. They would engage an Indian post from the front to fix their attention, while simultaneously sending light infantry units infiltrating through unmapped mountain passes behind Indian lines.
Oh, cutting them off.
They would cut off the Indian retreat routes and ambush the supply lines. They divided Indian forces into small, isolated pockets.
And once you're isolated.
Once a force is isolated, surrounded, and cut off from supplies in the mountains, its combat power drops to zero very quickly. You don't even have to kill them. You just starve them of ammunition and let the panic set in.
They also integrated psychological warfare into this operational art, right? We often think of information warfare as a modern concept with social media, but they were doing it in 1962.
Absolutely. The Chinese heavily utilized native language loudspeakers right on the front lines.
Loudspeakers, really?
In the dead of night, they would broadcast messages in Hindi or Gurkha to demoralize the Indian troops.
That is so creepy.
They spread rumors that the Indian leadership had fled, that they were surrounded, that resistance was futile. They actively managed perceptions. They wanted to shatter the mental robustness of our forces before breaking them physically.
And it worked.
It did. They achieved complete tactical surprise in almost every engagement, ensuring they maintained overwhelming local superiority at the exact point of attack.
So despite all these blunders, the terrain disadvantage, the political naivety, the logistical nightmare, India actually possessed massive strategic assets that it simply chose not to use.
Yes, we did.
Which brings us to a critical section, force multipliers, specifically air power, intelligence, and logistics.
Let's start with the great enigma of the 1962 war. Why did India not use the Indian Air Force for offensive combat operations?
Right.
The IAF was only used for transport and supply drops.
Yeah.
In modern combat, air power is the ultimate force multiplier. It can drastically and instantly alter the tactical balance on the ground, especially in mountain warfare, where deploying heavy artillery is incredibly difficult.
I've always struggled to understand this. Not using the Air Force because we were afraid of escalation feels like fighting a heavyweight boxer, getting beaten to a pulp, and keeping one hand tied behind your back just to be polite.
Exactly.
Were we victims of our own extreme caution?
We were victims of flawed intelligence and an overarching, almost irrational fear of escalation. The Intelligence Bureau, still under Mullick, presented a completely unrealistic threat assessment.
Mullick again. What did he say this time?
They confidently claimed that if India used fighter jets, the Chinese Air Force would retaliate by launching massive strategic bombing raids on Indian cities like Calcutta or Delhi.
Bombing our cities.
Based on this phantom threat, the political leadership and even some conservative voices within Army headquarters were terrified of provoking the Chinese further.
But that assessment was completely wrong, wasn't it?
It was a colossal intelligence failure. Post-war analysis and subsequent historical records prove that the Chinese had virtually no combat-ready aircraft deployed in Tibet in 1962.
Wait, none at all.
They lacked the fuel infrastructure.
Yep.
Chinese jets taking off from the high-altitude Tibetan plateau suffered massive payload penalties.
What does that mean?
It means they couldn't carry enough bombs or fuel to reach Indian cities and return. The air is too thin at that altitude for a heavy takeoff. Furthermore, they didn't have adequate night fighting or radar capabilities at that time.
Meanwhile, what did the Indian Air Force have?
The IAF had highly capable fighters like the British-made Hunters and Gnats operating from air bases in the plains. We didn't have the altitude penalty.
We had the advantage.
A massive advantage. We did have night interception capability. If the government had committed the IAF for close air support strafing Chinese infantry, bombing their supply dumps, disrupting their command nodes, the IAF would have had a free run over the tactical battle area.
Wow.
There was no Chinese air defense. You leave your most dangerous weapon on the ground because you think the enemy will retaliate, when in reality your enemy was completely weak in the air.
That's agonizing to hear.
Offensive air support could have easily saved brigades like the 7th Infantry at Nam Kachau from being annihilated.
We also have to factor in the diplomatic pressure, though. The U.S. ambassador, John Kenneth Galbraith, was heavily involved in advising Prime Minister Nehru against using air power, right?
Yes, Ambassador Galbraith was constantly advising against escalation.
Why?
His primary fear was that a wider war might force Pakistan to open a second front against India, causing the entire subcontinent to spiral out of control. It was the height of the Cold War, and the U.S. wanted the conflict contained.
That makes sense from their perspective.
But ultimately, the decision not to use the IAF was ours. It was driven by a lack of coordinated, objective intelligence assessment within our own government.
And speaking of intelligence, our human intelligence was severely outmatched by the Chinese. How did they know exactly where our troops were?
The Chinese had spent years mastering human in Tibet. They utilized local Tibetan militia. They sent spies disguised as local herdsmen or even wearing Indian Army uniforms to gather tactical intelligence right behind our forward lines.
Sneaking right in.
They mapped every trail. They knew our exact troop locations, our pitiful supply levels, and even the identities and habits of our commanders.
And India's intelligence.
India failed entirely to fuse whatever scattered intelligence we did gather into actionable operational plans.
So the information was just sitting there.
An observation might be made by a border patrol, but that information would take weeks to filter up to Delhi, get processed, and reach field commanders. By then, the Chinese had already moved.
And then there's the logistical force multiplier, or for India, the complete lack thereof. Logistics dictate the pace of war.
Logistics is the lifeblood of mountain warfare. You cannot fight if you cannot eat or shoot.
Simple as that.
The Chinese had spent the better part of a decade meticulously building all-weather lateral roads right up to the line of actual control. When their troops moved, they moved in motorized trucks.
Trucks versus our porters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They had pre-positioned massive ammunition dumps in caves and bunkers. They had reliable, mechanized, and deeply entrenched logistical chain.
Whereas, as we discussed, we were relying on porters taking days to make a single trip. And the airdrops, this detail always shocks me. Wasn't there a massive systemic failure rate with the parachutes?
It is an absolutely tragic detail. Because of a misplaced bureaucratic economy measure initiated in Delhi,
Yeah.
the military was forced to reuse old, patched-up parachutes for supply drops.
To save money.
Yes. And as a direct result, 30 to 40% of crucial airdrops failed. Parachutes would tear or simply fail to open.
40%.
Precious winter clothing, vital ammunition, and rations would plummet at terminal velocity, smashing into the mountainsides or falling into inaccessible gorges.
Just criminal.
Imagine being a freezing, starving soldier on a ridge,
Yeah.
watching your lifeline plummet to destruction because someone in an office wanted to save money on nylon. Logistics isn't just about moving boxes. It's about sustaining the physical combat power and the psychological morale of your fighting force. When logistics fail, morale shatters.
The sheer humiliation of these cascading failures across command, intelligence, air power, and logistics, it forced a brutal, unavoidable reckoning for the Indian state. Which brings us to a massive pivot point. Lessons learned and military transformation. Because India didn't just accept this defeat and roll over.
No, they didn't. The immediate aftermath of 1962 was a seismic shock to the national psyche. The illusion of peaceful coexistence was dead.
Right.
The government immediately commissioned the Henderson-Brooks-Bagot report to ruthlessly review the operational reverses.
That's the famous classified report.
Yes. While its full contents remained highly classified for decades, the fundamental, undeniable takeaway was clear. The Nehruvian neglect of the military was no longer a viable policy for national survival.
It's exactly like a person suffering a massive near-fatal heart attack.
A good analogy.
It's terrifying, it brings you to your knees, but it's the ultimate catalyst. It's what finally gets you to the gym, forces you to change your diet, and fundamentally rewires how you live your life. 1962 was India's geopolitical heart attack.
That is precisely what happened, and the transformation was incredibly rapid and massive. The defense budget, which had been starved for a decade, nearly doubled almost overnight.
Doubled.
It jumped from around 474 crore to 816 crore rupees. The political leadership finally realized that defense planning couldn't be ad hoc. It had to be a long-term, systematic process. This realization led directly to the formulation of the first comprehensive five-year defense plan in 1964.
And structurally, the Army fundamentally changed how it viewed the Himalayas, right? We stopped treating the mountains as just a static natural wall.
Exactly. The mountains were now recognized as a dynamic battlefield. The Army raised highly specialized mountain divisions. We didn't just want infantry, we wanted troops who belonged to the mountains.
Specialists.
We created elite, world-class training institutions like the High Altitude Warfare School, HAWS in Gulmarg, and the Parvagatak School in Tawang. Troops were no longer just sent directly from the hot plains into the snow.
Thank goodness for that.
They underwent rigorous acclimatization schedules, extreme endurance training, and specialized mountain combat drills. We institutionalized the harsh, unforgiving realities of high-altitude warfare into our core training doctrine.
Conceptually, too, there was a major doctrinal shift. We moved away from just holding a line in the snow to a much more aggressive, dynamic posture.
We abandoned the outdated concept of static, positional defense. The new doctrine embraced the concept of offensive defense and quid pro quo, or QPQ, operations.
Break that down for us. What is QPQ mechanically?
If a hostile force crosses the border and occupies Hill A, you don't just throw your men into a meat grinder trying to take Hill A back frontally. Instead, you maintain mobile reserves. You immediately launch a counteroffensive across the border at a different location, seizing Hill B, which the enemy values.
Ah, so you take something of theirs.
You hit their vulnerabilities and force them to recoil. You create leverage. You don't just sit in a trench waiting to be surrounded. You retain tactical mobility and initiative.
So what about the intelligence architecture? Because the B.N. Mullick era proved how incredibly dangerous, siloed, tailored intelligence could be. Did we fix the root cause?
The intelligence apparatus saw a massive foundational restructuring. The primary goal was to eliminate bureaucratic turf wars and ensure the political leadership received holistic, objective threat assessments.
So no more telling them what they want to hear.
Right. This led to the evolution and empowerment of the Joint Intelligence Committee, which eventually, years later, paved the way for the National Security Council Secretariat.
Okay.
The core idea was fusion. You must fuse military intelligence, foreign diplomatic intelligence, and domestic intelligence into a single, unified picture. Furthermore, India rapidly expanded its technical intelligence capabilities like aerial reconnaissance and signal interception, moving beyond just relying on human.
We needed ears on the ground and in the air.
We realized that if we don't independently know what's happening 50 kilometers across the border, we're fighting blind.
We basically had to relearn and forcefully institutionalize the fundamental principles of war, didn't we?
We did. The principles that were so casually ignored in 1962 became the absolute bedrock of our new military doctrine.
Like what, specifically?
Selection and maintenance of aim, ensuring that the political goal is crystal clear and matches the military capacity to achieve it. Offensive action and concentration of force, meaning you don't fight in weak, isolated penny packets.
Like those small outposts.
Exactly. You mass your combat power, your artillery, and your air support at the decisive point to smash the enemy. And security rigorously protecting our forces from surprise, deception, and espionage. These weren't just academic textbook terms anymore. They were hard lessons written in the blood of the soldiers who fell at Nam Kachau and Rezan-La.
So, if we continue the analogy, the gym routine from that 1962 heart attack continues today. Because while the nature of the threat has evolved, the geography, those freezing, jagged mountains, remains exactly the same. Let's transition to our final major section, contemporary relevance. Because 1962 isn't just a chapter in a history book, it is the exact lens through which we must view the present.
Without a doubt. If you want to understand the geopolitical mechanics behind the recent military standoffs at Doklam in 2017 and Galwan in 2020, you absolutely must look at the Chinese strategic mindset in 1962.
Are there parallels?
Striking, undeniable parallels. Both then and now, China uses border friction not just as a territorial dispute, but as a calibrated geopolitical tool. They deeply respect hard strength, and they ruthlessly exploit weakness.
And a major part of that calculus is their internal politics, right? Their domestic issues heavily drive their external aggression.
Always. You have to look at Beijing's internal pressures. In 1962, Chairman Mao Zedong was facing intense domestic political pressure. His disastrous economic policy, the Great Leap Forward, had completely failed, causing a massive famine and millions of deaths.
So he needed a distraction.
His position was weakening. He needed an external enemy, a decisive military victory, to unify the nation, silence his critics, and solidify his absolute leadership.
And today?
Fast forward to 2020, and President Xi Jinping is facing a similar pressure cooker. Slowing economic growth, the massive global fallout and internal disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, and unrest in Hong Kong. The narrative of the inevitable Chinese dream was under pressure. Creating a controlled crisis on the Indian border served a very similar domestic rallying purpose.
The core lesson hasn't changed in over 60 years. Weakness invites aggression, but the tools of deterrence have evolved. Today, a hard-topped road, a reinforced bridge, or a mountain tunnel is just as much a weapon of deterrence as a battery of artillery guns.
That is the most profound strategic shift we've seen. Today, India is executing massive, relentless infrastructure projects to permanently close the logistical asymmetry that crippled us in 1962.
We're building those lateral roads now.
Look at the Edel Tunnel, an engineering marvel that provides year-round, all-weather connectivity to the Lahaul-Spiti Valley, cutting hours off troop deployment times. Look at the Darbuk-Shek Daulat Beg Oldi, or DSDBO road. It's a vital, hard-top strategic lifeline running right alongside the LAC in eastern Ladakh.
That changes everything logistically.
Look at the reinforced bridges over the Subansiri River in Arunachal Pradesh, designed to carry main battle tanks. These aren't just civilian engineering feats. They are direct military force multipliers.
Right.
They allow the Indian Army to rapidly deploy, sustain, and resupply massive combat formations right up to the front line. Today, a hard-topped road sends a clear message to the enemy that we won't retreat. We will stand right here.
And we aren't just relying on roads to send a message. The actual military hardware and the strategic posture have completely transformed from those .303 rifles.
Completely transformed. We have deliberately moved toward a posture of full-spectrum strategic deterrence. From the successful testing and deployment of the Agni-V intercontinental ballistic missiles, which bring all of mainland China into range, to the deployment of advanced S-400 air defense systems along the borders,
We are showing our teeth.
we are explicitly signaling that any tactical escalation by the adversary will come at a massive, unacceptable strategic cost. We saw this exact posture in action during the Galwan and Pangongsa standoffs.
How so? Provide a concrete example of that shift in action.
Look at the rapid deployment of heavily armed quick reaction team boats on the freezing waters of Pangongsa Lake. Look at the incredibly swift, stealthy, proactive operation by Indian Special Forces to occupy the dominating Kailash Heights, catching the Chinese completely by surprise.
Oh, the QPQ in action.
That is the offensive defense and QPQ doctrine in pure action. India in 2020 did not react like India in 1962. We didn't wait to be surrounded. We seized the initiative. We met force with force, deployment with deployment, and resolve with absolute resolve.
But as we look to the future, the battlefield is rapidly expanding far beyond the physical rocks and snow of the Himalayas. We are firmly in the era of multi-domain warfare now.
This is where military professionals must focus their minds. The future of conflict with China will not just be infantry skirmishes or tank battles in the mountains.
What will it be?
It will be waged simultaneously in domains we cannot see. It will involve devastating cyber warfare, advanced electronic warfare, and sophisticated information warfare. China has integrated all these capabilities deeply into its PLA Strategic Support Force.
What does that mean for an Indian commander on the ground?
It means our military commanders must plan for terrifying scenarios where, at the exact moment a physical border incursion begins, our satellite communication networks are jammed.
Oh, wow.
Our regional power grids are targeted by malware to plunge command centers into darkness. Our logistics nodes and railway networks are subjected to paralyzing cyber attacks. The physical war and the digital war will happen at the exact same second.
So, connecting the ghosts of the past to the immense complexities of the present and future, what is the ultimate grand strategic imperative for India today?
The imperative is clear. We must build, maintain, and continuously upgrade full-spectrum deterrence. This means integrating our air, land, sea, cyber, and space battle doctrines seamlessly into a joint force.
Everything working together.
Exactly. It means continuing the relentless infrastructure push in the border areas. But crucially, it also means stepping out of the shadows of non-alignment and forging strong, pragmatic, strategic partnerships with other democratic powers, like the QID, to balance regional hegemony.
And domestically.
At the exact same time, we must maintain absolute self-reliance in our critical defense manufacturing through initiatives like Atmanirbhar Bharat. We cannot rely entirely on foreign supply chains in the middle of a shooting war.
That's a vital point.
The romantic era of Hindi Chini Pai Pai died in the snows of Nam Kachu. Today and tomorrow, international relations and border security are based purely on hard power, mutual deterrence, and a cold, clear-eyed assessment of national interests.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. From the political corridors and diplomatic naivety of the 1950s, to the freezing, blood-stained heights of the Himalayas, to the cyber domains and hypersonic realities of tomorrow.
It's a lot, but let's cement everything we've discussed. If you are a military professional, a student of history, or a strategist listening to this, here is the rapid, integrated mental revision you need to permanently burn into your mind.
Go ahead.
The sequence of causality is everything. Tibet falls, stripping away our buffer and leading directly to the border dispute. To counter this, the flawed, politically driven forward policy is implemented without any logistical backing.
Right.
This massive vulnerability triggers the tactical disasters at Nongkachu and Tawang, which snowballs rapidly into the operational command collapse and panic at Sela and Bomdila.
The chain reaction.
Despite the incredible, unmatched tactical heroism of the Indian soldier at Walong, Chushul, and Rizangla, the overarching political failure at the top leads to a complete breakdown in the higher direction of war.
Because the strategy was fundamentally broken.
The Chinese perfectly execute their operational art because our logistics and force multipliers were virtually non-existent. The sheer national humiliation of this defeat forces India to absorb brutal lessons learned, sparking massive, rapid defense reforms.
And those reforms brought us here.
And those very reforms dictate our contemporary relevance and strength today in places like Galwan and Daklam.
Burn this final, continuous framework into your mind. Every major conflict follows this exact chain. Political vision dictates strategic planning.
Right.
Strategic planning drives military preparedness. Military preparedness determines campaign execution. Campaign execution provides operational lessons. Operational lessons force defense transformation. And defense transformation secures national security.
The 1962 war is not merely a story of defeat. It is India's most important case study in strategic planning, military transformation, and national security.